Breaking news. The NFL world is buzzing right now, and this story is catching fire across social media. Former Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce has dropped comments that stirred up a storm, hinting that Tom Brady may have given inside information to the Raiders in the past. Yes, you heard that right, inside information. Pierce didn't stop there. He admitted that while Brady was seen as a huge asset, he personally wouldn't feel comfortable with this kind of situation. And that's where the controversy heats up. Before we dive deeper into this breaking story, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and don't forget to press the bell icon so you never miss the latest NFL updates. Now, let's get back to the news. Here's the core issue: Tom Brady isn't just any broadcaster stepping into a production meeting. Normally, when analysts from TV networks meet with coaches and players, they share insights freely, because broadcasters aren't tied to a specific team. But with Brady, things are different. He's not only a legendary quarterback turned analyst, he's also part owner of the Las Vegas Raiders. That ownership changes everything. During the recent matchup against the Chargers, Brady was spotted in the coach's booth with a headset on. To many, that looked less like a guest appearance and more like someone with direct access to team secrets. The big question being asked: is Brady crossing a line by having one foot in the booth and another in the owner's box? Antonio Pierce compared the situation to Michael Jordan, who never worked media while owning an NBA team. He called Brady the elite of the elite, but admitted he would be uneasy with this dual role. And listening closely, you can sense Pierce trying to pull back as he realizes how much he's revealing. This controversy is only growing, and fans are already debating what this means for the NFL and the Raiders moving forward. Antonio Pierce didn't hold back in his comments. He openly admitted that Tom Brady, even as a minority owner, was giving the Raiders valuable insight. According to Pierce, it would be foolish to believe that Brady could sit in on practices, listen in during production meetings, and not share some of that information. He said it directly: "We had those conversations, and Brady was very informative." That's exactly why a franchise brings in a legend like Brady, because he sees the game differently than anyone else. But Pierce also admitted something else: if he were coaching, he'd be nervous. Nervous about what was being said in meetings, nervous about what was being shown in practices, because Brady has the ability to pick up the smallest details and turn them into advantages. Pierce even called out what most coaches won't say publicly. He said the political answer is to pretend it doesn't matter, but he doesn't buy it. In his words, if a broadcaster like you or me showed up, teams would instantly go quiet. But when the broadcaster is Tom Brady, one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, and a Raiders owner, it changes the game completely. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Brady has already been on the broadcast crew for games involving teams that the Raiders will eventually face. He called the Commanders game. He'll be calling the Broncos and a few others coming up. If what Pierce is saying is true, Brady could walk away from those meetings with fresh intel that might end up back in the Raiders' hands. Of course, teams are pushing back on that idea. The Raiders, Pete Carroll, Chip Kelly, each of them has denied that Brady has shared anything. They've all repeated the same line: "He doesn't help us at all." But Pierce's words tell a different story. He's basically confirming that Brady was an asset last season for the Raiders, and he strongly hints that this dual role, owner and broadcaster, is unlike anything the NFL has dealt with before. Chip Kelly tried to downplay the situation, saying Tom Brady isn't involved in the Raiders' game planning or their daily operations. According to him, their conversations are just casual football talk, discussions about schemes, strategy, and the game itself. Nothing, he insists, that the Raiders could actually use on the field this season. But here's the reality: the debate isn't about whether Brady is in the Raiders' locker room drawing up plays. The real concern is access. When you're part owner of a team and also working inside broadcast production meetings, you're hearing things most people never do. And even if Brady never intends to cross a line, the possibility alone has coaches and executives uneasy. Think about it this way: if Brady truly had been feeding Antonio Pierce insights last year, how much did it really change things? The Raiders only managed 4 wins. So the question becomes, even if he's sharing information, does it actually make a difference on Sundays? Some coaches are already adjusting. Bears head coach Ben Johnson admitted he holds back details in production meetings, especially knowing that Brady is tied to the Raiders. Executives and general managers around the league have echoed the same sentiment through back channels. They simply don't feel comfortable with Brady's dual role. The NFL has tried to step in, putting certain restrictions on him. Reports say Brady isn't allowed to attend practices in person and can only participate virtually, limiting what he sees. Whether that's strictly enforced is another question, but the controversy isn't dying down anytime soon. Many wonder if the league will eventually force Brady to choose between being a broadcaster or an owner. Meanwhile, the Raiders did get some positive news on the field. Jackson Powers-Johnson, their young offensive lineman, returned to practice. Just yesterday he was wearing a red no-contact jersey, the kind reserved for quarterbacks, but today he's back in regular gear. That's a promising sign for a Raiders offensive line that desperately needs stability. The return of Jackson Powers-Johnson is more than just good news, it could be a turning point for the Raiders offensive line. The fact that he's back in regular gear at practice suggests he's ready for contact, and that alone is a huge boost for this struggling unit. Let's be honest, the Raiders offensive line hasn't looked sharp so far. Without JPJ, their interior blocking has been shaky, and the run game has suffered because of it. That's why his presence at center could make such a big difference. Unlike most linemen, a strong center can influence plays on both sides of the field, cutting off defenders to the left or sealing gaps to the right. JPJ has the skill set to do exactly that. Now, will the Raiders throw him straight back into the starting role? That's still unclear. They might decide to ease him in behind Alex Kappa or continue forward with Andre James, but history tells us something important. When Raiders linemen go down with injuries, they don't always get their jobs back. We've seen it with John Simpson. We've seen it with Andre James last season. Will JPJ be treated as a cornerstone player or just another piece in the rotation? That's the question. And here's where the debate gets interesting. On paper, advanced analytics are painting the Raiders' offensive line in a surprisingly positive light. A composite ranking that averaged scores from Pro Football Focus, SAS, and ESPN has the Raiders at 12th in pass protection through 2 weeks. To some fans, that means the unit is performing better than the eye test suggests. But numbers can be deceiving. Stats like pressures allowed or sacks given up don't always capture the full story. Timing, quarterback movement, and situational breakdowns matter just as much as raw data. The Raiders may look like a top 12 unit on a spreadsheet, but anyone watching the games closely knows the performance hasn't matched that ranking. This is exactly why JPJ's return matters. If he can anchor the middle and bring stability, the Raiders line won't just look good on paper, it might finally start showing up where it counts, on the field. When you look past the surface-level stats, the real story about the Raiders' offensive line becomes clear. Raw numbers like pressures allowed don't always tell the full truth, you need context. And that's where advanced breakdowns make all the difference. Take this for example, the Raiders have already surrendered 22 pressures that came in under 3 seconds. That puts them tied for 5th worst in the league, alongside teams like the Dolphins, Saints, and Cowboys. On paper, that's alarming. But here's where it gets tricky, those numbers don't account for how often teams rely on just 5 offensive linemen versus keeping extra blockers in. Consider the Carolina Panthers. They've allowed the most quick pressures, but they've also trusted their line in 69 separate 5-man protection calls this year. The league average? Just 39. The Raiders, by comparison, have only lined up in 5-man protection 38 times, ranking in the bottom half of the league. And that's the key difference. Elite offensive lines, think Cleveland, Buffalo, or Tampa Bay, aren't afraid to say, our 5 linemen can handle your 4 pass rushers. They let their skill players run more routes, creating more options for the quarterback. The Raiders? They've leaned heavily on 7-man protection, which means fewer receivers in routes and more strain on the passing game. This is why context matters. The numbers might suggest the Raiders are average in protection, but when you see how often they keep tight ends and backs in to help block, you realize the truth, this line is being propped up by extra support. Without it, things could look a lot worse. The Raiders' blocking strategy tells an interesting story. When it comes to 5-man protection, they're near the bottom of the league. But with 7-man protection, they're near the top. In fact, they've already used 7 blockers 9 times this season. And that speaks volumes. Here's the issue: the Raiders just aren't hitting on explosive plays. There was one designed for Trey Tucker, a play that could have gone for a touchdown. He was about to break free, but before the quarterback could even set his feet, pressure was already in his face. The chance was gone in an instant. That's the pattern. The deep concepts are there, but the offensive line can't hold up long enough to let them develop. Instead, most of the Raiders' deep shots have been nothing more than simple go routes, just sending a receiver straight downfield and hoping for the best. The creativity is limited, because the line simply doesn't buy enough time. And even when they load up with 7 blockers, the results aren't much better. Too many pressures come in under 3 seconds, and it completely changes the offense. Forget about giving the quarterback 5 clean seconds in the pocket, the Raiders have barely seen that this year. Other teams manage it occasionally, but not this unit. The problem doesn't stop with the passing game either. Let's talk run blocking. Right now, the Raiders' offensive line ranks near the very bottom when it comes to creating space. Statistically, they're averaging 0 yards before contact. That means the running back is basically getting hit at the line of scrimmage, with no push, no breathing room, no cushion. Compare that to a team like the Patriots, whose line is generating nearly 2 full yards before the back even sees a defender. For the Raiders, the numbers paint a harsh picture: no time for the quarterback, no room for the running backs, and an offense that's stuck in quicksand. Now here's where things get interesting. By the numbers, the Raiders' run game looks bad, but believe it or not, there are teams struggling even more. The Bengals and Browns, for example, are producing less push than the Raiders. Even the Chargers, with all their talent, aren't finding much success on the ground. On the flip side, look at the teams thriving in the run game: the Eagles, Ravens, Lions, Patriots, and a few others. Their backs have room to work, and it shows. But let's shift to something that's been buzzing lately: Jonah Laualu. If you check the stat sheet, he's tied for 4th in the league in sacks. That headline alone has started a small wave of excitement, people calling for him to get more snaps, pushing for him to see the field more often. Here's the catch: when you really dive into the tape, the story isn't as shiny. I went through all 61 of his snaps this season, and I have to be honest, he's not standing out. 2 of his 3 sacks don't even come from him beating his man cleanly. They're more like situations that fell into his lap than examples of pure dominance. The 3rd sack? Sure, that one had a nice move, but outside of those plays, he hasn't generated pressure. Out of 30 pass rush snaps, those sacks are all he has to show. And that's the concern. Because the Raiders staff once talked about Laualu like he could be the next breakout player, someone who would anchor the line for years. But so far, the tape doesn't back up the hype. He's not creating consistent disruption, and without that, the sack total feels a little misleading. Right now, Jonah Laualu doesn't look like a difference maker on tape. Could that change? Absolutely. He's still young, and development takes time. But the early hype around him feels like it's running a step ahead of reality. And this is where context matters. Just like with the Raiders' offensive line, you can't just look at the raw numbers and assume you know the full story. Sacks, pressures, rushing yards, they only tell part of it. The tape always reveals the truth. When you dig deeper, you see the patterns. The offensive line isn't just giving up pressures, they're doing it faster than almost anyone else. The run game isn't just below average, it's stalling before the back can even breathe. And on defense, some players might have shiny stats, but the film shows whether those plays were earned or opportunistic. That's the reality for this team right now. There are bright spots: Adam Butler has made real impact plays, and even Thomas Booker has shown more than expected. But there are also places where expectations need to be reset, where the numbers don't match the eye test. If the Raiders want to climb out of this, it's going to take more than stats on a page. It's going to take consistency, stronger execution, and players who can win their matchup straight up. Until then, the struggles we're seeing aren't just flukes, they're symptoms of deeper issues.